harmony and love, universal love, and loving kindness as beautiful words. But they are words. What is the reality of loving kindness, of metta? Is it something you create with words by thinking positively and loving everybody and everything? When so much of the world isn't lovable. What we see and hear and smell and taste, touch is not lovable or good or right. We're very much aware of what's wrong, who's to blame, and we take sides and we end up in quarrels and confusion, and we try to we blame others for our suffering or for what's going wrong in the world. So we're caught in a web, captured in a web, a sticky web that we're clinging to, and we don't notice this. We don't know what we're clinging to. We just are caught in the web, kind of helpless beings, like flies in a spider's web. And how do you get out of the web? And so this teaching of the Four Noble Truths are the directions on how to let go. So it's not about me as a separate form, like a fly that figures out how to get out of the spider's web. It's not that I can figure out how to get out of the realm of delusion as a person. But it's through letting go of everything. Just relaxing, being here and now, of being the knower of the world. All the world, all phenomena, all experience through the senses is impermanent and not self. So in Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism emphasizes anatta, which means not a separate self. So does the spider get out of the web? Well, it eventually dies, or the spider consumes it, or something, but that's not it. It's not about death. It's not about escape through becoming free as a separate individual, but no longer believing, no longer caught in the beliefs, the conditioning, the habits, and operating from just the way you've been conditioned to think, to feel, to experience life. So what's left when you let go of everything is love, is metta. Unconditioned love. It's because Dhamma is love. There'd be nothing without love. If there is no consciousness, there'd be nothing, no space, no forms, no earth, fire, water, and air. So that's why I encourage you to really investigate these 6 elements, which are very much a part of the original teaching of the Buddha. Consciousness and space are empty. They're formless. Space doesn't have a form. Consciousness has no form. But what has form are earth, fire, water, and air. These bodies, when we investigate, reflect on the nature of our own physical body, it's just made up of earth, of solid elements, liquid elements, fire elements, air elements. This is what the body is these four elements in space. So right now, reflecting on the way it is, the space is here and now. You can actually perceive space just by looking. You know, say the space is this Dhamma hall that is spacious, but the Dhamma hall is in space. The planet Earth is in space. The sun, moon, stars, the galaxies are all in space. And if there is no space, there'd be no forms. So then we get to the forms. They can vary. Forms are very impermanent. Like all of us. Once we're born, we grow up, get old, and die. That's the nature of forms. That's the way forms are. They're impermanent, and they're not self. Thoughts, beliefs, fears, desires of all sorts are forms that arise and cease according to conditions. But how could there be space if there was no consciousness? You know, so consciousness is the source. Consciousness then is the end of suffering. And we're all conscious forms here and now. But the ignorance, the avijja, is that we identify with the forms, with the names, with the beliefs, with the conventions. We're attached and bound to the limitation of form in space, and we don't know it. So we suffer because of that. Like growing old is like this. So reflecting on the aging process, does consciousness age? Does it have an age, or is it the body? So just the body is the way it is. Right now, this old body is like this. If I'm identified with it, if that's my identity, so if I still believed that I was a person, a separate person, then, you know, there's a lot to kind of, who am I? An old monk in a monastery? Where do I belong? And then there's a lot of fears about death. I don't want to suffer from pain. I want a peaceful death. Or I want to live another decade. People oftentimes wish on my birthday that I live to 120 years. And that's a kind of a curse. Imagine trying to, you know, life is physically difficult enough at 89. But 120, I'd hate to imagine what I have to deal with if this body lived to that venerable age. It might be praiseworthy, has some kind of great attainment. But then that's the person again, thinking I want to attain the age of 120. So is it suffering to get old? You know, I could create suffering around aging by just resenting the fact that my vision's not very good, or I can't walk very well. You know, because as a person, as a personality, I like walking, I used to have perfect vision and all this, so that's the personality, which is very conditioned, very impermanent, That's where I operate from, then old age is suffering. But is old age suffering if you're aware, if you realize your true nature is Dhamma, Amatta Dhamma, deathless reality, absolute reality, then what's there to suffer from? And that's Nirodha, when you really see the end of suffering is always here and now. It's not about in the future ending suffering, but the realization, the simple reality of non-attachment, letting life be what it is, living in the form, like in the monastic form, is a very honorable way to spend one's life as a samana. Doing good, refrain from doing bad, and on like this. So the morality, the goodness of the form is a very, admirable way to live one's life, to just develop the path, what they call the Eightfold Path, the realization of the deathless, the Amatta Dhamma. And the Buddha made it very clear in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, his first sermon, that it's neither annihilation nor eternalism. It's not about becoming an eternal kind of entity, or about killing yourself, or about suicide, or annihilating anything. It's not about destruction or creation, but about the reality of here and now, timeless. So this practice, 3 months traditional retreat at this time, which the Sangha will formally enter tomorrow, see it as, to really investigate how you react, how you respond to situations. Just not to be critical, but just, it's not a critical investigation about right and wrong anymore. It is about the way it is. All conditions are impermanent. What arises ceases. So during this vasa, I encourage all of you to really be the knower of the world. The world is, a very confusing place. We've got all kinds of ominous signs with climate change and wars and nuclear threats and droughts and famines and fires and all kinds of ominous predictions for the future that are very scary. So how do we relate to this? People ask me, how do I relate to the climate change? There's so much controversy around about degradation of the environment, about the green movement, and all these are rather noble causes. But they create also a lot of suffering for us. We get so involved with who's to blame and who's for the green movement, who's for climate change, who's against it, who's to blame, and we take sides. And we get caught. We believe we are in the sticky web that we've created, that we're bound to out of ignorance. So letting go is not becoming indifferent or not caring, but it's realizing that there's absolutely nothing to fear. Everything has its time. If it has a beginning, it has an ending. So that's the nature of conditioned phenomena, of sankharas. So you're never going to get a permanently good sankhara, a stable government, democratic system where everything is fair and just. Because that's an ideal, beautiful idea. But changing is the nature of phenomena, and it's not always changing in the way that we want it to. So as long as our attachment to the world, no matter how righteous or good your ideas might be, they are ideas. And the world is a condition that is changing. But what doesn't change, the end of suffering, is here and now. The awareness, sati sampajanya, mindfulness, and precise understanding that you're not anything that's conditioned or bound to a sticky web. That right now the world might be, the conditions that we're involved in become sticky, but that's also impermanent. So in Sangha life or in lay life, in family life, we begin to stop creating suffering around the way it is. That doesn't mean things change, except that we're not suffering over the changing conditions that we're experiencing. So growing old is like this. So there's no suffering in conscious awareness. In personality, in personal preferences, I could create all kinds of suffering about getting old. About the world, about climate change, we can certainly commit ourselves to good causes and try to bring more awareness to the climate or our position in it as a separate form, as an entity. But as long as you bind yourself to that limitation, then suffering is the result. You can't escape it. That sankharas are all suffering. There's no attachment to sankharas are suffering. This blind, ignorant attachment to phenomena that changes, and oftentimes changes in a way we don't like. But it's not about liking or disliking anymore, it's about understanding. Understanding suffering, understanding desire. When you see yourself, trying to get rid of desire? The second noble truth is all about pointing out the nature of desire as a sankhara. Desire is conditioned, and it's not self. And it can be understood. So when you see yourself as a greedy person, a lustful person, or as one who has a lot of anger and resentment, that's suffering. To see yourself always in terms of what you believe is right or wrong about yourself, the form that you identify with. So this Four Noble Truth teaching is something to take seriously. And of course, in the history of Buddhism, as it developed from the time of the Buddha to the present time, it's had many changes, some of them very good and some of them, very deluding. But the essential teaching has never been corrupted or changed. The Four Noble Truths is a very precise, very accurate direction to investigate. It doesn't ask you to believe or cling to Four Noble Truths, but to investigate according to the directions. They're not beliefs. You don't have to believe in the Four Noble Truths. They're to question, to investigate, to find out for yourself. So the realization of Dhamma is Panchitang Veti Dapo Renui, to be realized individually through wisdom, through ineffable wisdom. Not wisdom you acquire from reading wise sayings, but wisdom that has no language, but is apparent here and now and timeless. So I offer this as a reflection for today.